Every year, thousands of truckers vanish from the logs of America's highways. Not from wrecks, not from breakdowns, but from routes that seem to swallow them whole. Some blame fatigue, some blame storms, but others whisper of bridges that stretch too far, roads that were never meant to end, and voices calling from the sea. Tonight, you will hear one of those true horror stories that actually happened. A journey across an ocean highway where the living are not welcome, and where the water itself remembers every soul that dares to cross. What waits beneath the waves is older than asphalt, older than the road, and it is already watching you. The trucker eased onto the bridge as if rolling onto the spine of something alive. Headlights cut a narrow tunnel through fog, the color of old steel, and the ocean below answered with a steady hush that rose and fell like breath. CB static whispered inside the cab, a snowy hiss that came and went. The dashboard glow painted his knuckles a faint amber while the air conditioner hummed. He told himself that plenty of highway horror stories began with a driver imagining things. He was not here for superstition. He was hauling paint to a shipyard 2 states over, watching the tack, the temp, the fuel, and the mile markers like a man who lived by routine. Still, the rails on either side seemed to drift wider, then narrower, as if the bridge breathed when he was not looking. The tires sang on the asphalt, a high note that made his teeth ache. He toggled the radio and let Channel 19 spill its familiar chatter. A voice bled through the static with a laugh about late coffee and a stubborn clutch, and cut off mid-sentence. The ocean answered that sudden silence with a wet slap on stone that he could not see. He glanced to the right and found only blank vapor, thick and pale, a curtain that swallowed his high beams and gave nothing back. The world felt shaved down to 5 details: wheel, pedal, fog, breath, sound. He kept the pace steady and matched his breathing to the rhythm of the engine, counting seconds, trying to pin time to something he could control. A minute stretched long enough to hold 2, then snapped short without warning. Flecks of salt glittered on the windshield, but the sky above the vapor looked dry. He tasted brine and thought of deep water, swallowing old stories, the kind that become true horror stories that actually happened when. He looked left, and the fog thinned enough to hint at a drop that made his stomach float. He imagined a black mass under him, a moving plane that did not care about pavement or guardrails, a sea that had been here long before maps. CB static returned in a voice he did not know, one that seemed to shape meaning without words. He told himself there were no paranormal road encounters tonight. There was only a long job and a longer BR. The road ahead seemed built to never end. The fog pressed tighter as if the bridge itself wanted to smother sound, until a low vibration touched the cab glass. At first, he thought it was a loose brake drum humming under strain, but then the note deepened into a toll, a bell, muffled, metallic, and far too close to be buried under miles of black water. The sound rattled his windshield as though the glass remembered something heavy beneath it. He gripped the wheel harder, knuckles pale in the glow of the dash, and tried to rationalize. Ships once passed these coasts, he thought. Maybe a buoy, maybe a lighthouse marker still wired to ring. But no map he carried listed such things, and the GPS had already betrayed him twice tonight, lagging behind turns and freezing on blank blue screens. He knew the ocean should be silent here, but the toll came again, longer, louder, vibrating in his chest. He cracked the window to prove it was only in his head, but the night air answered with the taste of rust and salt, thick enough to sting. Every few seconds the bell moaned like a lung filled with water, and each time the note came, his steering wheel twitched beneath his hands. It was as though the sound had weight, tugging the truck closer to the rail. The radio hissed, then bled into fragments of words, half syllables, as if someone were trapped beneath static, begging to be heard. This was how it always began in highway horror stories, the kind he had scoffed at in truck stops over bitter coffee. bells ringing where no church ever stood, sounds crawling into engines and bones. This was the type of moment that lived forever in true horror stories that actually happened, whispered by men who swore they had heard the impossible. He told himself he was not one of them. He told himself the bell was only metal and tide. But the bell tolled again, impossibly near, as though calling him by name. The bell rang again, closer this time, impossibly near. The bridge ended in a turnout that should not have been there. One lone shack leaned against the guardrail, its wood bleached gray by salt and time. A single bulb swung from a crooked awning, buzzing faint as though powered by some current buried under the tide. He slowed, curiosity clawing at him harder than caution, and rolled the truck onto gravel that crunched like seashells under his tires. The shack's door creaked open before he killed the engine. An old fisherman stepped out, hunched, skin like leather pulled tight against bone, eyes pale as weathered glass. His clothes dripped seawater, though the sky above remained dry, though the fog behind him never broke. The old man raised a shaking hand and spoke in a cracked voice, the sound threading through CB static and the hum of cooling brakes. "This highway steals travelers," the fisherman rasped. "The sea notices those who cross, and once it notices, it never lets go." His words fell like lead into the night air, heavy, certain, impossible to ignore. The trucker wanted to laugh, to tell himself this was only another creepy roadside encounter from asphalt shadows, the kind men shared for tips or cigarettes. But the fisherman's stare did not waver, and every word felt like rusted truth. The air shifted colder. Salt stung his throat. In the silence that followed, the ocean hissed beneath the planks of the turnout as though it wanted to speak, but could only push sound through the fisherman's cracked lungs. He thought of all the asphalt shadows real-life trucker horror stories he had shrugged off. Voices, signs, vanished bridges, and wondered if he had driven straight into one of them. The sea remembers every soul it has claimed. Back on the bridge, the fog parted just enough for him to see it, a dark spire jutting from the water like a finger pointing to heaven. He blinked, thinking it a trick of headlights refracting on mist, but as the truck rumbled closer, the shape sharpened. A church steeple, cross at the peak, dripping with seaweed, stood proud above the waves. For a moment, it looked as if the whole building still lived beneath, waiting for the tide to fall. He slowed, pulse rising, staring hard through the windshield. The bell inside the steeple glistened with wet metal, motionless yet dripping grime. He thought of the drowned bell he had heard not long ago, and his chest tightened. Could sound travel through water like that? Could it climb back into the air, ringing warnings from a sanctuary long gone? The fog swirled, and with it came a hush, the kind of silence that fills a room just before a prayer. He gripped the wheel, eyes locked on the cross above the spire. Then, without warning, the whole church sank. 1 second it stood against the tide, the next it slipped beneath the surface without a ripple, swallowed as though it had never been. The sea crackled. A voice he did not know murmured words blurred by static. Paranormal road encounters always start this way, signs the living are not supposed to see. He killed the radio, but the whisper lingered in his head, louder than the engine. The cross vanished before his eyes, swallowed whole again. The fog thickened, and headlights carved no further than a few yards ahead. That was when he saw her. A woman stood on the shoulder of the bridge, soaked from head to toe, long hair plastered to her face. She raised one arm slowly, not frantically, just enough to signal for him to stop. Every instinct told him to keep going. Still, the unwritten code among truckers weighed heavy. You do not leave someone stranded. He braked, the hiss of air brakes echoing against the black water below. She climbed into the cab without a word. Salt water dripped from her dress onto the seat, pooling into a dark patch that spread across the fabric. He tried to speak, asked if she needed help, if she was hurt, but she only stared forward, lips trembling as if forming words the air refused to carry. The hum of the engine grew louder, and so did the smell, damp like a drowned cellar. He reached to turn down the AC, but his fingers froze. The vents were wet, dripping condensation thick as tears. He glanced at the passenger seat again. Empty. Just puddles, fresh droplets sliding into the fabric as if she had only just vanished. He gripped the wheel harder, heart pounding. Creepy roadside encounters from asphalt shadows always started with hitchhikers like her, pale and voiceless, ghosts pretending they still belonged on the road. He leaned forward, staring through the windshield, but his eyes darted once more to the puddle. A single ripple moved across the water on the seat, as if something unseen had just shifted beside him. Her voice whispered once more, from the empty seat. The stench hit first, salt and mildew, like ropes left to rot in a forgotten boathouse. He wiped a hand across the steering wheel and felt moisture clinging to the leather. His palm came away wet. A drop fell onto his wrist, then another. He tilted his head toward the vents. Water was beating on the slats, trickling out in steady rivulets, soaking the dash. The windshield fogged from the inside, as though the cab itself was drowning. He flicked the defroster. The fan roared, but instead of air, more brine spilled out, slicking his fingers when he tried to adjust the controls. The smell thickened until it burned his throat, making every breath taste like seawater. He coughed, hacking into the steering wheel, blinking tears away. The gauges flickered, red needles jerking as if the truck were submerged in static instead of electricity. Salt water dripped onto his boots. It ran down the pedals, puddling on the mat. He swore under his breath, grabbing a rag from the glove box, but the cloth sagged heavy with water the second he touched the dash. No leaks above, no rain outside. The sky was clear above the fog. The only explanation was impossible. The ocean was inside with him. Every highway horror story he had ever heard felt like child's play compared to this. No joke swapped over coffee, no exaggerated yarn about true horror stories that actually happened could prepare him for the reek of rot that filled the cab. This was personal. The sea wanted him to know it was closer than he dared admit. The truck reeked like something drowned long ago. The fog thinned for just a breath, and in that gap he saw lights below. Not the erratic flash of waves catching moonlight, but the steady glow of street lamps, rows of them lined like veins across a drowned city. His heart skipped, then pounded so hard the steering wheel shook under his grip. Beneath the black water stretched rooftops, chimneys, even what looked like a flickering neon sign bending with the current. He leaned forward, forehead nearly against the glass, trying to make sense of it. The shapes swayed, distorted by the ripple of waves, but they were too clear to be dismissed. The bridge groaned beneath the weight of his truck, yet down there a town glowed faintly, stubbornly alive. He thought of photographs of Pompeii, a city frozen in ash, except here the dead streets were lit as though waiting for their people to return. For a moment, he wondered if he was staring at the past, some drowned community erased by a hurricane, kept alive in memory only. But the street lamps flickered in rhythm, like electricity still pulsed through their veins. He swore he saw movement in one of the windows, a shadow crossing behind glass, as if someone inside had just turned away. CB static popped, and a warped voice bled through. Not all towns die. Some sink and still breathe. His stomach flipped. These were not stories told secondhand in truck stops, not echoes of paranormal road encounters, swapped like ghost tales. This was alive beneath him, glowing proof of something that should not exist. And the road he drove was built directly over it. The street lamps below flickered. As if still alive, he slowed, his movement stirred along the edge of the bridge. For a moment, he thought the tide itself had risen higher, but then he saw it, docks, warped and dripping, stretching out from the fog as if they had clawed their way up from the sea. Lanterns swung dimly, casting sickly halos across figures that should not exist. Fishermen, or what used to be. They hauled nets glistening with seawater, ropes slapping against phantom wood. The truck's headlights caught their faces, hollow eyes ringed in black, jaws slack, but moving as though whispering to each other. Salt dripped from their clothes, pooling across the concrete. Yet when the beams passed, the puddles vanished, leaving only the hiss of waves that were not really there. One of them turned, slowly, deliberately. The movement was too precise to dismiss as a shadow. His gaze locked with the truckers through glass and fog. Empty sockets seemed to know him, to recognize him. The figure raised a hand as if in greeting, but the net it held writhed as though something alive was trapped inside, thrashing in silence. His chest tightened. These were not just creepy roadside encounters from asphalt shadows, not the kind traded in whispers over greasy diner tables. This was the ocean pulling itself onto the road, dragging reminders of every life it had already swallowed. And now they were watching him, waiting for him to stop, daring him to look over the rail. One fisherman pointed at him, mouth moving soundlessly. The fog shifted like curtains in a cathedral, and from below rose a sound no engine could drown out. At first, it was only a low hum, rolling with the tide. Then voices layered one atop the other, dozens, maybe hundreds, weaving into a hymn that had no language, no origin. It was beautiful in the way storms are beautiful, terrible, overwhelming, the kind of beauty that makes the chest ache. He rolled down the window to prove it was not in his head. The air was cold, sharp with brine, and the song poured in like water, filling a lung. Men, women, children, their tones braided together, swelling and breaking like waves against a shore. Each note vibrated in his bones, making the steering wheel tremble under his hands. He thought of highway horror stories, told at midnight stops, voices claiming they had heard cries under bridges or laughter in culverts. But this was not a cry or a laugh. It was worship. Something in the sea sang as though it believed, as though it wanted him to kneel. And threaded through the harmony came words that formed clearly now, even through salt-choked air. The hymn twisted, and then one word stood out above the rest. His name, whispered, stretched, repeated. It did not matter how hard he pressed the accelerator. The voices kept pace, rising louder until the truck's mirrors quivered as though about to shatter. And then the hymn spoke his name aloud. Up ahead, twin red taillights swayed in the fog. Another car, a small sedan hugging the center line. Relief flickered through him at the sight of another traveler, but it died almost instantly. The car shuddered, skidding as though the pavement had turned slick, though the asphalt was dry. Its tires screamed, rubber clawing at concrete, but the vehicle began to drift sideways, sliding as if pulled by invisible hands. He leaned on the horn, a blast that rattled his own cab, but the sedan's driver never looked back. The headlights tilted, then dropped, vanishing below the guardrail. For a split second, he saw the whole car hanging in midair, nose tipped toward the water, before the black swallowed it. The taillights glowed dimly, shrinking deeper and deeper until they winked out. The splash never came. His stomach turned cold. He slowed, staring at the place where the guardrail stood unbroken, perfect, untouched. No sign of an accident, no debris, not even a ripple on the water below. Yet the air still carried the smell of burnt rubber, sharp and acrid, mixing with salt. He gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady his hands, trying not to remember the fisherman's warning. Once the sea notices you, it never lets go. True horror stories that actually happened did not vanish into thin air, he thought. But this one had. This was not an echo, a story retold. This was unfolding before his eyes. And deep down he knew, the car was not gone. It was still out there, headlights burning in a place no map could chart. The water swallowed their screams before he could react. Chapter 11. Mile marker 66. The bridge stretched on, endless, when a shape emerged through the fog. A road marker, tall, narrow, leaning just enough to look weary. His headlights caught the numbers painted white against black. 66. He blinked once, twice. He had already passed the marker only minutes ago. The math did not add up. He slowed, watching as the sign loomed closer. Something hung from it, strands glistening in the glow. Seaweed, slick and dripping, clung to the post like each drop that fell landed with a sharp hiss, vanishing into dry asphalt that should not have been wet at all. He eased onto the shoulder, heart thudding, just long enough to roll down the window. The smell of brine hit like a slap. Salt water pattered onto his arm from nowhere, icy and bitter. The marker itself seemed to pulse faintly, numbers glowing soft as if lit from inside. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The digits bled together, smearing in the light until they almost looked like they were shifting into letters. His stomach clenched when he thought he saw his own name written there, clear for only a heartbeat before it slid back into a crooked 66. CB static flared. A voice, strained and distorted, whispered through the hiss. "You are counted now." His grip on the wheel tightened. Breath shallow, skin prickling. Asphalt shadows, real-life trucker horror stories were not supposed to come alive like this. But here he was, boots damp, clothes sticky with salt, staring at a mile marker bleeding seawater onto a road it was supposed to be solid. The marker dripped seawater onto his boots. The fog parted just enough to reveal a figure on the shoulder, standing rigid in the dim wash of his headlights. At first, it looked like another stranded traveler, but as the truck drew closer, the details snapped into focus. A uniform, tattered and clinging with seaweed. A cap pulled low, the brim rotted at the edges. And eyes, glowing pale blue, fixed on him with a calm that was far worse than anger. The trucker eased off the accelerator, every instinct telling him to pass by, to pretend the figure was not there. But the captain lifted one dripping hand and raised it slowly, pointing straight down the endless road ahead. Water poured from his sleeve, dark and steady, as though an invisible tide still moved through his bones. The CB hissed alive without his touch. A low voice cut through, warped with static. "Keep driving, you are already too far in to turn back." He slammed the dial off, but the words had already lodged in his chest. The captain had not spoken, but the message lingered, heavy as chains. He watched the figure in the mirror as the truck rolled past. The man did not follow. He only stood, fingers still raised, head tilted like one who had seen this all before. And for a moment, the trucker thought of the warnings he had laughed off. Paranormal road encounters told in truck stops, spectral guides on cursed highways. Only now the guide was not a story. It was here, dripping on the asphalt, eyes glowing in the fog. The captain raised his hand again, urging him onward. The road narrowed as if the bridge itself wanted to funnel him into a trap. Then, shapes lurched into the beam of his headlights. Figures stumbling across the lanes, dragging ropes and nets that slapped weightily against the asphalt. He hit the brakes, heart hammering, but the truck did not skid. The road felt sticky, slick with salt water that had not been there a moment ago. They were fishermen, or what was left of them. Faces sunken, skin gray and bloated, eyes white as milk. Their clothes sagged, dripping streams that pooled in their footprints. The stench hit next. Rot and brine fused together, thick enough to coat his tongue. He gagged, choking on air that felt more like liquid. The nets they carried writhed with shapes he could not name, something alive thrashing inside. One corpse stopped directly in front of his truck, hollow sockets fixed on the cab. Slowly, it raised a hand in a gesture that looked halfway between a wave and a warning. Another figure staggered closer, dragging its net until it scraped against the driver's side door. Sparks hissing where rusted hooks met steel. The trucker gripped the wheel, paralyzed, every instinct screaming to drive through, but knowing deep down the road would not let him. This was not just another tale whispered at midnight diners, not another creepy roadside encounter from asphalt shadows told to spook green drivers. This was the curse itself, stepping onto the asphalt, dragging the sea with it. The cab filled with CB static, voices tangled and overlapping like prayers drowned long ago. Their nets writhed with shapes that should not move. The bridge bent slightly, and through the fog a glow shimmered on the water. At first, he thought it was just another street lamp drowned beneath the tide, but the light sharpened into letters. Neon, red and blue, sputtering weakly, yet stubbornly alive. Vacancy. The word hung in the dark, tilted on its side, like it had been ripped from shore and nailed to the waves themselves. He slowed, knuckles tight against the wheel. To his right, only yards away, a two-story motel stood completely submerged, every window glowing with faint yellow light. The sign buzzed underwater, each letter fizzing with sparks that never burned out. A row of doors lined the facade, all closed but all numbered, as if waiting for guests who might still check in. The water should have distorted everything beyond recognition, but the details were painfully clear. Drapes swayed behind glass panes as though stirred by wind, though there was none. A shape crossed one room, tall, slow, deliberate, before vanishing behind a curtain. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, but the motel remained, glowing brighter, humming louder, like it wanted him to stop. Highway horror stories often told of phantom diners or vanishing truck stops, but none of them matched this. None had neon letters pulsing under black water, their light crawling over his cab as if to lure him closer. The CB crackled to life on its own, a single word bleeding through static, whispered like an invitation. Stay. The sign's glow pulled him toward the black water. The hum of the neon faded behind him, but a new sound rose in its place, a gentle lap, steady as breathing, brushing against the truck's tires. He glanced at the mirrors and froze. Seawater sloshed across the bridge, thin at first, like a spilled drink sliding over linoleum. Then it thickened, climbing, spreading, as if the ocean itself had decided the road belonged to it. He pressed the accelerator, engine roaring, but the tide matched his speed. Waves rolled alongside him, licking at the doors, rising with every heartbeat. The headlights fractured in the water, bouncing strange reflections onto the dashboard. He swore he saw shapes beneath the surface, limbs, faces, mouths opening in silent screams as they drifted with the current. The truck rattled, tires fighting against the sudden drag. He tried the wipers out of instinct, though the windshield was dry. They squealed uselessly while water splashed higher, striking the side mirrors, flecking the glass with salt. The smell was unbearable now, sharp and raw, as though he had driven straight into the belly of a gutted fish. This was no mirage, no story retold at truck stops. True horror stories that actually happened did not need neon lights or whispered legends to make their point. The sea was making it clear in the most physical way possible. He was not driving above it anymore. The ocean was climbing to meet him. The tide climbed higher, licking at the driver's door. The tide pressed low against the truck, but his eyes were not on the road anymore. They were locked on the water itself. Shapes drifted below, faint at first, and clear enough to send his breath stuttering. Transparent coffins, dozens of them, floated past beneath the surface, each one gliding in eerie silence. Their glass lids gleamed in the dim glow of his headlights, as if polished for display. Inside lay faces, pale, rigid, eyes closed, but mouths slack as though they had been frozen mid-breath. Some were young, some old, some in uniforms, others in ragged clothes. The current pushed them along, one after another, like an endless funeral procession. His throat tightened as one coffin tilted, pressing its lid against the underside of the bridge as if begging to rise. Then he saw it. A face that looked far too familiar. Same jawline, same scar above the brow, same heavy lines carved from long nights on the road. His own reflection stared back at him from inside a glass coffin, lips moving though no sound escaped. For a second, the eyes opened, his eyes, and the expression was one of pure panic. Paranormal road encounters were supposed to leave room for doubt. Tricks of light, strange weather, echoes of the past, but there was no doubt here. His coffin drifted below him, staring back with his own face, his own terror. The bridge groaned as the current pressed harder, as though the sea was offering him a preview of where he belonged. Chapter 20. The whirlpool the chains snapped loose from sight, slithering back into the fog, but the bridge didn't settle. It groaned louder, steel and concrete bending under pressure he couldn't see. Then the pavement ahead began to twist. Guardrails curled inward like ribbons pulled by an unseen hand. The yellow lane lines bent in spirals, circling a black pit that yawned in the center of the road. He slammed the brakes, but the truck slid forward as if the asphalt itself had turned liquid. Tires screeched, skidding toward the vortex. The headlights swung wild, illuminating the whirlpool forming where the highway should be. Water gushed up through cracks in the concrete, spinning faster, deeper, until it swallowed whole chunks of roadway with a sound like tearing metal. The cab shook violently, dashboard lights flickering, CB shrieking static that came in broken fragments. Paranormal, road, encounters. The words were jagged, ripped apart by distortion, but he knew what it meant. This wasn't just another cursed mile marker, not another drowned motel or vanishing passenger. This was the road itself giving way, betraying the living to whatever waited in the abyss below. The wheel jerked left, then right, as if something inside the vortex had already latched onto him. His muscles screamed, but he could barely keep control. The entire world was being funneled down into that spiraling mouth of Black Sea, and his truck was sliding closer, inch by inch. The bridge spiraled into the mouth of the sea. Chapter 17. The siren's call. The cab had gone silent, save for the hum of the engine and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. He told himself it was better this way. No voices, no bells, no hymns, just road and machine. Then, faint as a sigh slipping through glass, a voice slid into the silence. It was soft, unmistakably female, low enough that he leaned closer to the dash as if it were hiding inside the wiring. The tone was neither shrill nor menacing. It was too tender. Each word brushed his ear like breath. You're tired. You can rest. The water is warm. He shook his head hard, gripped the wheel tighter, muttering curses under his breath. But the whisper grew bolder, curling between words he thought were his own. Peace, it said. Just let go. Jump, and it will hold you. The steering wheel vibrated, faintly at first, then stronger, till his arms buzzed as if electricity ran through them. He snapped his eyes to the passenger seat. Empty, just the old puddle, darker now, spreading across the fabric. Then, as the voice returned, the seat shifted. A dip in the cushion, invisible weight pressing down, water rising up from nothing. The whisper came clearer, now from the place right beside him. Creepy roadside encounters from asphalt shadows told of phantom passengers and vanishing hitchhikers. But this was no ride-along spirit. This was a siren, and it had climbed inside his truck. The voice begged him to join her below. Do you want Chapter 18 to explode into spectacle with the impossible tsunami in reverse? Or keep the intimacy of the siren lingering one more beat before the world breaks again? Chapter 18. Tsunami in reverse. The voice in the cab fell silent, cut off so abruptly it made the hum of the engine sound deafening. He leaned forward, scanning the fog ahead, and that was when the horizon cracked open. At first, it looked like the line where ocean meets sky had simply torn, splitting wide, like fabric pulled too tight. Then the water itself began to rise. A wall of sea surged upward, not forward, climbing into the air as though gravity had forgotten its purpose. The wave arched backward, folding in on itself, racing toward the heavens in a slow, terrible crawl. He slammed the brakes, the truck groaning against the strain, but he couldn't look away. The headlights caught spray suspended midair, droplets hanging like stars, frozen in defiance of every natural law. The bridge shuddered. Metal rails bent inward, vibrating like tuning forks under a cosmic hand. The sound was unbearable, deep, resonant, like the drowned bell magnified 100 times, rattling his ribs. The CB sparked to life, shrieking static that carried a single phrase before cutting out. Highway horror stories end here. His blood ran cold. Then, as suddenly as it had risen, the wave collapsed. The sky swallowed it whole, the horizon snapping shut with a silence so heavy it pressed against his eardrums. No splash, no echo, no aftermath. Just a trembling road, a stinking cab, and a man who realized the sea didn't have to follow rules. It could break them whenever it pleased. The wave collapsed into silence that chilled his bones. Chapter 19. The broken anchor. The silence after the wave was worse than the roar. He pressed the accelerator, desperate to put distance behind him, when a new sound erupted across the bridge, metal dragging on stone. The kind of screech that rattles teeth, claws into bone. Sparks flashed ahead, looming and dying in the fog. Something massive moved across the asphalt. At first, it looked like a serpent, thick links writhing as though alive. Then he realized it was a chain, rusted, each link the size of a tire, dragging its weight across the bridge with steady, merciless rhythm. It carved grooves into the concrete, sparks spitting upward as if the road itself was protesting. He searched for the end, craning his neck, eyes wide, but the chain stretched both directions into the mist, endless. The links rattled like bones shaken in a giant's hand. Then the bridge lurched. The steering wheel jerked in his hands as though something below had taken hold. The cab groaned, suspension screaming. He knew this wasn't just debris. This was a relic, a tether from the deep. True horror stories that actually happened always clung to fragments of the real world, anchors, buoys, wrecks. But no story he'd ever heard prepared him for the weight of this chain, for the way it pulled against his truck, tugging him toward the rail. Chapter 21. Submersion. The whirlpool swallowed the road whole, and with one last lurch, the truck tipped forward. Gravity snapped him against the seatbelt as the headlights plunged into black water. The world outside dissolved into bubbles and shadows, the surface vanishing above him like a dream erased. Inside the cab, silence hit harder than the crash. No roar of engine, no static, no creak of metal. Just stillness, as if sound itself had drowned. He gasped, lungs burning, but no water poured in. The cab remained dry, impossibly sealed, yet outside his windows drifted the drowned town. Rooftops, street lamps, and faces pressed against glass coffins, watching. Their eyes followed him, waiting for him to join. The dashboard flickered. A glow spread across the gauges, dim at first, then pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Salt streaks spread across the windshield from the inside, spelling out shapes he didn't want to recognize. Words blurred, then sharpened. Drive. His hands moved on instinct, gripping the wheel. The truck rumbled to life, though no road remained, tires spinning against nothing. And still, it moved forward. Through black water, past drowned steeples, past endless windows lit with impossible yellow light. There was no surface anymore, no sky, no horizon. Only an eternal descent through a highway that belonged to the ocean now. He realized with a cold certainty that this was the curse. Not death, not drowning, but driving forever, unseen, beneath waves that would never let him go. The bridge is gone now, swallowed back into fog and tide. No record of its construction exists. No map dares to chart its course. But truckers still talk, in hushed tones at midnight diners over static-filled radios, about the ocean highway, about paranormal road encounters that drag men beneath the surface. Maybe you believe it was only legend. Maybe you think this was just another tale to keep rookies awake behind the wheel. But if you ever find yourself driving late at night and you hear a bell tolling beneath the waves, remember this story. Because once the sea notices you, it never lets go. And if you made it this far, share this nightmare so others know what waits on the road. Subscribe to Asphalt Shadows, where the darkest highways are never empty, and every mile could be your last.